Hello and welcome to Module 4. So we are quickly approaching the midway point of this course, and so hopefully you have had an opportunity to get started on your observation hours. But as I mentioned in last week's announcement, if you have not, or if you have not received your placement yet, please let me know so that I can try and contact the proper HR coordinator to see if I can expedite the process. But remember, you do need 40 hours of observation. It does have to be a K-12 classroom. And if it's a public school, then you do need to go through HR, which means filling out the appropriate placement request form and then sending it to me so I can then send it to HR. But it appears as though most of you have already gotten started. Some of you are already finished. And so just a few words to keep in mind. Definitely be working on the journals as you go. Remember that they have been available to you in every single one of the modules, but there are 8 different topics that you're going to be looking at. And each one of the journal entries has to begin with the researched information about that particular topic. And then the second part of the journal is going to be what you observed in the classroom. And then the last part of it's going to be how are you going to use the information. So just make sure that you are submitting those as you go. And as soon as you're done with your hours, you can go ahead and upload your hours log. It is listed in the observation information module in our course. But this week we're going to be starting Module 4, which is going to cover 3 weeks. And this really is kind of where we're getting to the practical part of teaching. So when you look at Module 4, you're going to see that the title of our module is Designing Classroom Instruction. And so you're going to be looking at 3 different chapters in the book, looking at curriculum, looking at technology, and then looking at school reform. So you'll see that I have for you all of the PowerPoints. I've also put in the link for the standards of learning as well as Common Core. Virginia is not a Common Core state. And I am very thankful for that. If you've never done any type of research into the Common Core, I would definitely encourage you to do that. It's a set of standards that were developed with the hope of the entire nation adopting them. But Virginia is one of only a handful of states that chose not to. And when you read through the Common Core, my personal opinion is that I do not think that they are developmentally appropriate. And while I think the purpose behind them was probably well-intentioned, I don't think the application has been the way that they were expecting it to be. And as a matter of fact, a lot of states who originally adopted the Common Core have now pulled back and are starting to re-examine. So Virginia does not use them. Instead, we use the standards of learning. And so I have that link for you because you are going to need to use standards in this module. So like I said, this module is probably the most practical because you're actually going to be designing some instruction and assessment, as well as looking at technology in the classroom. So I have, again, a lot of resources for you. I never expect you to read everything word for word. I just want to give you as much information as I can so that you can build your library. But really the heart of this module is going to be looking at designing a lesson plan and designing an assessment to go along with it. And then your discussion for this module is going to be about technology in the classroom. So I just quickly wanted to go through each one of these so that you understood what it was that I was looking for. So when we are looking at the lesson plan, you are actually going to be designing a lesson. This cannot be one that is coming from a pre-made curriculum. I really want you to start becoming proficient in how you are going to plan a lesson. So I always recommend picking the grade that you think you're interested in teaching, because if you're going to create an assignment, it might as well be something that you're going to be able to use in the future. And so you are going to be putting together a lesson plan for the grade that you're interested in, and then subject matter, an activity, a topic that you would like to plan a lesson for. This is not a unit. This is simply one lesson that you would teach. So I have told you that there are several things that I want you to make sure that are included in your lesson plan. And so your name, what grade level it is, what the subject or the content area is, the number of students. And the reason I have that is because I'm looking at whether or not you're creating this as a whole group lesson, a small group lesson, or a one-on-one. Any of those is fine. It's just I need to know up front how you're planning this instruction so that when I look at your procedures, I can make sure it matches. The length of the lesson, so this should be in minutes, this should not be in weeks. So whether or not your lesson is going to be a 15-minute lesson, a 30-minute lesson, an hour lesson, but again, this is one activity that you are doing. I'm not asking you to develop an entire unit. I just want one lesson. So what materials are you going to need for this particular lesson? What is your standard of learning? And so this is where you're going to need to go to the SOLs, look in the grade, look in the subject area that you're designing for, and there should only be one. I know that when you look at the SOLs, it will have lots of letters. I only want one. So even though we know you're going to meet several of those standards, which one do you feel like is best met during your lesson? And then when you write your objective, there's a formula for writing it, and it always goes, the student will, and then you fill in what the standard, when they, and then you fill in the activity. So your lesson objective is only one sentence long. So then you start getting into the actual teaching procedures, introduction to a lesson. How are you going to get them excited about what you're getting ready to do? What is your actual instruction going to be? Again, outline the steps that you're going to take. How guided practice, how are the students, how are you going to guide them as they're starting to work on this concept? Are they working alone, in a small group, whole class? What are you going to be doing? And how are you going to give them an opportunity for independent practice? For the assessment portion, remember, assessment does not always have to be a test. It can be a project, it can be an interview, it can be an activity that you set up for them. But this is what you're actually going to be using for the assessment assignment. So always go back to your standard because that's what you're assessing. You're not assessing whether they had fun, although I hope that they did. You're really assessing, did they learn what you wanted them to learn? How are you going to close the lesson, which means how are you going to review it at the end? And then I need your rationale. This is going to be a good paragraph that talks about why did you choose to teach this lesson on this topic in this particular manner. So as long as all of these are addressed, it really doesn't matter to me what format you use. If you Google lesson plan template, you're going to find hundreds of thousands of them. So it really is personal preference for you. But if you're using something that's already been developed, just make sure that all of these are covered. If you do not have one that you're using, I did create a template that has all of these in it, and so that way you can just type directly into it. So once you're done with your lesson plan assignment, then you're going to move on to the assessment assignment, and that's where you're actually going to use the information from this lesson plan to create your assessment. So if you go to the assessment assignment, you are going to see that you're going to be taking quite a bit from your lesson plan. There's really only a couple of things that you're adding. So the first thing that I want you to do is just do a little bit of research about assessment. There's all kinds of resources in Module 4, but I really want you to discuss the difference between formal and informal assessments, formative and summative, and traditional and alternative. So I would give each one of those a good paragraph. Remember to cite your information, and make sure that you give an example of each one of these types of assessments, just so that you're demonstrating that you understand the different types of assessments that are out there. But then this is where you're going to get practical. And so this is where you're actually going to take the information from your lesson plan and just plug it in here so that, again, I'm seeing the alignment between what you developed for your lesson plan and for the assessment. But then when you get to the assessment, this is where I actually want you to create one. So it's going to be based on the lesson plan that you did earlier. And so just make sure that, again, you give me the objective and the standard. What instructions would you give to the students? And then I need to see what is the assessment. So whether or not you're creating a test, whether or not you're asking them to do some kind of project, but I really want to see, how did you decide that you're going to assess what the students learned? So this is where I want to actually see the assessment. If you're asking them to create something, I would definitely make a sample so that I could see what it is you're asking them to do, and make sure that this is included in this portion here under the Part C. And then finally, your last portion, again, is a rationale. And so there's some questions here that I want you to answer. And it's just trying to get you in the mindset of understanding that our assessments can vary based on the subject matter, based on the grade level, but it's always based on, what do I want to know about what the students learned? I am not a fan of standardized tests. I do not think that they measure anything other than whether or not you're a good test taker. And so you really need, as you've done the research, as you've been in the classroom, you really need to be thinking about what's the best way to find out what they know. And sometimes it is not a test. So that's really what the majority of this module is about. It's designing the lesson plans and then aligning an assessment that goes along with it. And then finally, your discussion board for Module 4 is all about technology. And so when you go into it, you will see I've given you 10 arguments for using technology in the classroom. And so I really want you to kind of expound on this, use some research about why this particular technology could be good in the classroom, whether or not you think it's a valid reason for using technology or not. But this gives you an opportunity to just kind of explore the different types of technology that are being used, and are they being used for the right reasons? I think we would all agree that technology, we're all in an overload at this point, even starting with young children. So we really want there to be a balance between face-to-face human teaching as well as technology. I always say technology should supplement our teaching. It should not replace us. And so this is just an opportunity to start to get into the research about the technology in the classroom and whether or not it's being used correctly. So I think that takes care of Module 4. There's only one module after this one, and this is where we'll kind of be wrapping everything up. But as I said, in the meantime, don't forget to be working on your journals. Submit your hours log when you're done so that you're already finished with it. I will be returning the second draft of your teaching philosophy so that you have my final feedback before you do the last draft in Module 5. But other than that, enjoy being in the classroom. Soak up as much as you can from the teachers that you are observing because it really is going to help make you a better teacher. So have a great time in Module 4. I'll be checking in throughout the module, but my next video will be for Module 5.